A Lifetime of Hating You, a dramatic narrative narrated in the first person by Leah Moreau. Part 1, The Debt. My father killed 2 people on the night of the 14th of November when I was 5 years old. He did not mean to kill them. I want to say this because it is true, and because the truth of it is the only frame I have ever had for what happened, and because the absence of intent does not make the deaths less dead. He was drunk. He had been in an argument with a building contractor, a dispute over money, and the argument had become physical. And my father had done what frightened, drunk men sometimes do when their hands are already moving and the other person falls the wrong way. He got in his car, he drove, he ran a red light on the Rue des Acacias and hit a bicycle. The person on the bicycle died at the scene. The child in the bicycle seat behind them survived, because the bicycle seat faced backward and the child was small and the gods of arbitrary survival were present that night, or the physics were right, or some other explanation that I have never been able to find satisfying. My father came home. My mother tells me he looked like he had come back from somewhere else. She asked him what was wrong. He went into the bedroom. She heard the window open. She heard nothing after that. I was asleep. The person on the bicycle was a woman named Claire Fontaine, 32 years old, mother of 1 child, wife of a man named Olivier Fontaine, who had been a building contractor and who had been the man my father argued with about money. She was riding home from the grocery store. In the bicycle seat behind her was her son. He was 7 years old. His name was Remy. When I think about that night, which I do regularly, even now, I think about Remy Fontaine sitting in the bicycle seat in the rain behind his mother and the world ending. He was 7 years old, he was wet and cold, and his mother was on the ground, and the police came and no one could explain to him what had happened. And the man who had done it had already run his car into the garage of a house in the 16th arrondissement and walked upstairs and opened a window. I did not understand any of this when it happened. I was 5. The events came to me in fragments assembled over years, each fragment arriving when I was old enough to receive it, and then remaining added to the structure, another weight in what eventually became the specific and permanent architecture of my guilt. My father owed Remy Fontaine 2 lives. He could not pay this debt. He chose instead to remove himself from the equation, leaving the debt to be carried by the people he left behind. My mother carried it in the specific way she carried everything, silently and without discussing it, shrinking slowly into herself over the years that followed, the way plants shrink when the light is not right. She worked cleaning jobs in the mornings and administrative work in the afternoons. And she raised me, and she did not once in all the years I lived with her complain about any of it. I carried it differently. I carried it in the specific way of someone who has been told repeatedly and creatively by the world around them that the carrying is correct, that the debt is real, that the person whose father did the thing is as culpable as the person who did it. Remy Fontaine made sure of this from the first day of primary school. Part 2, Primary School. His name was Remy Fontaine, and he was beautiful, in the specific way of certain children who have been shaped by grief, the fragile and serious beauty of a person who has been given at an age when they could not handle it, the knowledge that the world ends. He was cold, not temperamentally cold, I understood later, but cold in the specific way of someone whose warmth was extinguished by a specific event and who had reorganized themselves around the cold because there was no other available configuration. He was quiet. He was intelligent in ways that his teachers recognized and the other children did not. The intelligence that is not performance but deep internal process. He hated me. The first event was in my 2nd week of primary school. I arrived in the morning to find my pencil case filled with insects. Not dangerous ones, but the specific insects of childhood horror, the worms and beetles that produce the maximum scream for the minimum harm. I screamed. The teacher looked at me with the expression that I would come to know very well in the following years. The expression of an adult who has decided that whatever I am upset about is probably my own fault. After that, it became a game with a very large number of willing participants. The game was called The Daughter of the Killer. It had few explicit rules, but a consistent underlying logic, which was that whatever was done to me was acceptable because of who my father was. Pencil cases, lunch boxes, notebooks filled with words I could read by the time I was 6 words I spent years trying to unread. I learned not to cry, not because crying was weak, the word for it was not weakness, but because crying produced laughter. And the laughter produced something in the other children, an escalation. The specific dynamic of a crowd that has found a stimulus and pursues it. So I stopped crying. I put my face into the neutral arrangement. I developed and maintained it. Remy did not always participate directly. He was the center of gravity, the thing that made the others feel that what they were doing was justified. When he watched, it was enough. The watching was a permission. He watched me in the way of someone performing an obligation, a person who has decided that the world owes them a specific quantity of suffering from a specific source, and who monitors the delivery of this quantity with the focused attention of a creditor managing an account. I was 7 years old, and I understood this about him. Children understand the dynamics of cruelty with more accuracy than adults believe. I knew what I was to him. I was the debt. I also understood, in the way that I understood things, that he was not wrong. His mother had died because of my father. His father had died because of my father, though this second death came differently and more slowly, the death of a man who had already been destroyed by the first death, and who had simply taken another 3 years to finish the process. By the time I was 8, Remy Fontaine had no parents. I had no father. I had a mother who was slowly disappearing. We were 2 orphaned children who had been put in the same place to manage the consequences of a single night, and one of us had decided that the only manageable form of the consequence was my suffering. I could not argue with this. I did not try. Part 3, the years. I want to tell you about the years without dramatizing them, because they were not dramatic. They were simply long. The specific length of 12 years of school is something you understand differently from the inside than from the outside. From the outside, it is a childhood, an adolescence, a formative period, the years that make you who you are. From the inside, when the inside is what mine was, it is a series of mornings that you survive. I survived by performing invisibility. Not physically invisible. I could not manage that, but the specific invisibility of someone who has reduced their footprint to the minimum. I sat at the back. I did not raise my hand, unless the answer was so obvious that not raising my hand would itself attract attention. I wore clothes that were clean and unremarkable. I ate alone, and I walked home alone, and I did my homework in the corner of the kitchen, while my mother made dinner, and I was in the technical sense fine. I was very good at school. Not consistently, not in the performed way of a student seeking approval, but with the specific quality of someone for whom the work itself was the point. I loved mathematics. I loved physics. I loved the specific clarity of systems that behaved according to their own internal logic, in which the answer followed from the problem with an elegance that the world outside the textbook was not capable of. Inside a physics problem, nothing was unfair. The rules applied to everyone. The answer was the answer. I entered secondary school at the Lycée Jean-Baptiste de Lamarck, which was the best school in our area, and which I had tested into, with a score that was my primary school teacher told my mother, with the specific reluctance of someone delivering positive news about a person they do not like in the top 5% of the region. My mother bought me a new backpack. She had saved for 3 months for it. It was blue. I carried it on the first day with the specific hope of someone who has just arrived at a new place and is trying to understand whether the new place is going to be different from the old place. It was not different, Remy Fontaine had also tested into Lamarck. I should have anticipated this. He was as good a student as I was in the specific way of people who have nothing else to invest their intelligence in. We arrived at the same school, and within 2 weeks, the dynamic was re-established, with the efficiency of something that has been running for years and knows its own machinery. He did not use insects anymore. We were too old for insects. The new form was more sophisticated and more effective, he told people. Not everything, not the legal details, but enough. He had a way of introducing the relevant information in context where it could land with maximum impact, a comment in a conversation that was not about me, an aside in a group discussion. The mention of my name and my father's name in the same breath, the specific pairing that produced in whoever heard it the reaction he required. His supporters were the popular ones. In every school, there are the popular ones. And in Lamarck, they organized themselves around Remy Fontaine with the specific gravitational logic of people who need a center. And he gave them what he needed from them without being particularly present for them. The cold intelligence of someone who uses resources efficiently and does not waste warmth, he does not have. The girl who led the organized portion of it was named Elise Moreau. She was the daughter of the school's vice principal, and she had the specific confidence that this origin produced the confidence of someone who believes that the institutional authority of her parent extends to herself. She was creative in her cruelties. She did not do obvious things. She did the sophisticated things. The removal of opportunities, the bureaucratic maneuvering, the use of official channels for unofficial purposes. In my second year at Lamarck, I won first prize at the regional physics competition. I had worked for it for 3 months, spending evenings on the specific problems of the competition syllabus, building my understanding from the first principles up. The prize was announced at a ceremony. I walked to the front of the hall to receive it. It was revoked before I could sit back down. Elise had filed a complaint of academic dishonesty. Remy stood as her witness. I had not cheated. The complaint was false. The teacher who processed the complaint either knew it was false and chose not to say so, or believed the word of the popular students over the word of the daughter of the killer. I do not know which. I know only that my prize was revoked, and I sat in the hall on the day of my 17th birthday and understood that there was a specific quantity of effort that the world would allow me to invest and a specific ceiling beyond which my investment would be returned. I went home. My grandmother, who had been alive then and who had been the second most reliable person in my life, had made a cake. She did not know about the competition or the prize or the revocation. She had made a cake because it was my birthday, and because making something sweet for someone you love is the action available when you cannot fix the things that need fixing. I ate the cake. It was good. She sat across from me and watched me eat it. With the expression, she had the expression that said, "I know the world is doing this to you. I cannot stop it. I am here anyway." I said, "Thank you, Grandmere." She said, "You are a good girl, Leah, whatever anyone says." I carried this. Part 4, the teacher. His name was Jean-Luc Valois. He was 24 years old when he arrived at Lamarck as a new teacher in my final year, fresh from his master's in French literature at the Sorbonne. And he brought with him the specific quality of someone who has just spent 5 years immersed in the study of how language works and has emerged with a generosity toward the world that had not yet been reduced by experience. He taught French literature to the final year classes. He was not remarkable looking in any conventional sense. He was thin and had the slightly distracted quality of someone whose thoughts move slightly faster than the situation, but he had a quality in the classroom that I recognized from the first session as rare. He did not perform teaching. He actually taught. He looked at his students, not the performance of attention, the specific thing teachers do when they want to appear engaged, but the real thing, the actual registering of each person in the room as a person. In the 3rd week of his first month, he looked at me. I was in the back row, as always. He had been asking the class about a passage from Camus, about the specific question of whether guilt is inherited or assigned, and the class was producing the expected range of responses, the performed ones, from the students who wanted to be seen, performing the safe ones, from the students who did not want to say the wrong thing, and the silence from the students who were not engaged. He looked at me in the back row and he said, "Moreau, what do you think?" I said, "I think the question assumes that guilt is a transferable substance, like money or property. But guilt is not transferable. The feeling of guilt can be transferred, or a cultural assignment of guilt can be applied to a person who did not do the thing. But the moral weight of the action belongs to the person who chose it." He looked at me for a moment. He said, "Develop that." I did. For 8 minutes, I held the class's attention by developing the argument that I had been living since I was 5 years old, the argument that was not abstract to me, but the central organizing fact of my existence. I said things I had never said aloud, not about my father, not about Remy, about guilt as a system, about the difference between being the person who does the harm and being the person who is given the label of the harm, about what it costs to carry a label that belongs to someone else. The class was quiet, in the way of people who have heard something they do not have a frame for. Jean-Luc Valois looked at me across the room with an expression I had not seen on the face of a teacher before, or not directed at me, the expression of someone who has just been shown something they were not expecting. He said, "Where did you learn to think like that?" I said, "Experience." He said nothing further about it in class. After class, he stopped me at the door. He said, "Moreau, are you all right?" I said, "I am fine, thank you." He said, "That was not the question I was asking." I looked at him. He was 24 years old, and he had been at Lamarck for 3 weeks. And he had asked me a direct question, and his face had the specific quality of someone who is going to hear the answer, regardless of what it is. I said, "I have been at this school for 2 years. Things are difficult, but I am managing." He said, "What things?" I said, "Things that are complicated to explain quickly." He said, "I have time." I did not tell him everything. I told him enough. The years, not the details, the shape of the situation, the weight of it. He listened with the complete attention he gave to everything standing in the doorway of the classroom, while the corridor filled and emptied with other students. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. He said, "I want you to know that I see what your scores are. I know what you are capable of. And I want you to know that in this classroom, for the rest of this year, the quality of your work is what matters. Nothing else." I said, "With respect, you have only been here 3 weeks." He said, "I know. I am telling you my intentions, not my guarantees. But my intentions are this." I looked at him. I believed him. Not naively, not without the reservation of someone who has been disappointed before, but with the specific quality of belief that a person offers when they have been watching carefully and have identified something worth trusting. I said, "Thank you, Monsieur Valois." He said, "Jean-Luc." I said, "Thank you, Jean-Luc." I went to class. The day continued, but something had changed in the specific way that things change when a person decides for the first time in a long time to allow a small quantity of trust. Part 5, the third person and the accident. I want to tell you about the day of the accident because it is the fulcrum of this story, the point around which everything else is balanced, and because telling it is the only way to tell the rest. It was in the second month of my final year, a Thursday afternoon in October. Remy Fontaine had been in a group of students in the courtyard who had done something that I had not witnessed and that had been reported to the administration as involving me falsely. I had been called to the vice principal's office, which was Elise Moreau's father's office, and I had sat across from him while he delivered the specific speech of a man who has already decided the verdict and is explaining it to the accused. I had listened. I had said very little. There was nothing to say. I was walking home across the footbridge over the canal when it happened. Elise Moreau had been drinking, not a great deal, but enough. She and two friends were on the same footbridge from the opposite direction. She said something to me that I will not repeat, because the specific content is less important than the quality of it, which was the quality of someone who has had enough wine to say what they always say, when sober, but more loudly. There was a scuffle. The specifics are disputed, and I have never contested the official version, because contesting it would have required more energy than I had. What I know is that Elise went over the railing. Not by my hand directly. In the movement, in the confusion, in the specific physics of a narrow bridge, and two people and a railing that was older than it should have been. She went over. She fell into the canal. The canal is not deep. She did not drown. She broke her arm and her collarbone, and she was in hospital for 3 weeks. She told her father I had pushed her. I had not pushed her. Her friends who were present said differently in private, and the same as her in official settings, because her father was the vice principal, and the calculation of where their interests lay was not complicated. Jean-Luc was the one who found me. Not at the scene, not immediately. He found me 2 days later at school, sitting in the back row of the empty classroom, before the morning session, having arrived before anyone else, as I always did, and he closed the door and sat in the desk beside mine. He said, "Tell me what happened." I told him. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "I believe you." I said, "That is kind. It does not change the official version." He said, "No. But the official version is not the permanent version. What is happening at this school to you has been happening for years, and it is wrong, and it is going to end." I said, "How?" He said, "I do not know yet, but it is going to end." I looked at the empty classroom, the chairs, the light from the windows. I said, "Jean-Luc, you have been here for 2 months." He said, "I know." I said, "The things that are happening here have been happening for 12 years. He said, "I know that too." I said, "With respect, what can a teacher who has been here 2 months do about 12 years? He said, "I do not know, but I am going to try to find out." I looked at him. I said, "Why?" He said, "Because what is happening to you is not the consequence of your father's actions. It is the consequence of a failure of every adult who has been in your vicinity for 12 years to name it correctly. I am naming it now." I said nothing. The classroom was very quiet. He said, "I am also going to tell you something, and I need you to hear it clearly. You are one of the most intelligent students I have taught, and I am 24 and have not taught very long, but I know what I am looking at. You have been made smaller by this situation. You are not small. I want you to understand that." I looked at the desk. He said, "Leah." I said, "Yes." He said, "I mean what I said." I said, "I know. That is what makes it difficult." He said, "Why difficult?" I said, "Because I have been living in a very specific, reduced version of myself for a long time, and someone naming the version accurately and describing the other one is disorienting." He was quiet for a moment. He said, "The other version is the real one." I said, "I am not sure anymore." He said, "I am sure, and you have to trust someone's certainty until you can rebuild your own." I looked at him for a long moment. I said, "All right." He said, "All right." The class started filling. We both looked forward. The day continued. I was not smaller than I had been, but I had been told by someone who had been paying attention for 2 months that the smaller version was not the accurate version. I kept this the way you keep things that have been offered carefully and received carefully. Part 6. What Remy did and what Remy knew. In the 3rd month of my final year, something changed. I was in the corridor outside the physics lab when Remy Fontaine stopped in front of me. He had not spoken to me directly in years. He had managed the situation at a distance through intermediaries, through Elise and her methods, through the specific organizational intelligence of someone who understands that direct action is less durable than structural pressure. He had been the architect, and she had been the executor, and I had been the site. He stopped in front of me. He looked at me. His eyes, when I looked at them, had the quality I had seen in them since we were 7 years old, the quality of someone carrying something enormous that they have organized their entire self around. He said, "I know you did not push Elise." I said nothing. He said I was on the other side of the bridge. I saw what happened. She was drunk, and she lunged at you, and she went over. I looked at him. He said I did not tell them that. I said no. He said I thought about it. I said I know. He said I thought about telling them. I thought about it for 3 days. I said, what stopped you? He looked at something past my shoulder for a moment. Then he looked back at me. He said telling them would have required me to say what I had seen, and saying what I had seen would have required me to acknowledge that I was there. And being there would have required explaining why I had followed you to the bridge. I looked at him. He said I was not going to do anything. I want you to know that. I was not there to do anything to you. I said, then why were you there? He said, because I watch you. The corridor was full of students moving around us, and we stood in the middle of it like two things that the current was moving past. I said, you watch me? He said, I have been watching you since we were 7 years old. I said, I know. He said, no, not the way you think. Not only the way you think. I looked at him, and I thought about 12 years, and I thought about the bicycle, and the rain, and a 7-year-old boy sitting in the dark before a door. I said, Remy? He said, yes. I said, I am not going to stand in this corridor and have this conversation. He said, I know I am not asking you to. He stepped back. He let me pass. I walked to the physics lab, and I sat down, and I opened my notebook. And I looked at the equations on the page, and I understood that the thing I had been carrying for 12 years had just shifted in its weight distribution, not lightened, but rebalanced, and that the rebalancing was going to require some time to understand. Part 7, the summer I could not speak. I became ill in the winter of that year. It started as something I attributed to the general physical consequences of years of managing a difficult situation, on inadequate sleep and insufficient food, and the chronic, low-level stress that becomes, over time, the body's default setting. I was tired. My throat was wrong in a way that was difficult to describe, not sore exactly, but present in a way that throats are not usually present. The doctor I saw in January said it was a virus. The doctor I saw in February said the same. The doctor I saw in March, a specialist my mother had saved for, looked at the scans for a long time, and then said things that I will not repeat exactly, because the exact words are not the point. The point is laryngeal cancer, advanced. The point is the specific language of a medical prognosis, in which the words treatment and quality of life appear in the same sentence as timeline. I was 17 years old. I want to tell you what I felt when I understood what I was being told, because the feeling was not what most people would expect, and the specific quality of it is part of this story. I did not feel fear. Not immediately. I felt something that was closer to a specific and exhausted clarity. The clarity of a person who has been in a long, difficult situation and has been handed by the situation a form of resolution that is not the form they would have chosen, but is conclusive. I thought about the canal and Elise Moreau's broken collarbone and the revoked physics prize, and the pencil cases full of insects and Remy Fontaine standing in the dark before a door at 7 years old. I thought about my grandmother and the cake and the words, "You are a good girl, Leah," whatever anyone says. I thought about Jean-Luc Valois saying, "The smaller version is not the accurate version." I went home and I told my mother. She sat at the kitchen table for a long time with her hands flat on the surface. Then she said, "All right, we will do this together." My mother, who had been slowly disappearing for 12 years, became suddenly and completely present. I did not know she still had this in her. She organized the appointments and the treatments and the insurance and the logistics of 2 months of a hospital routine with the specific focused competence of someone who has been running on low for years and has been given in the crisis access to a reserve. I will not describe the treatment in its physical details, because the physical details are not the story. The story is what happened in the space created by the treatment, the specific quality of time that illness creates, which is time without the ordinary velocity, time in which the things you have been moving past too quickly to examine become suddenly still enough to look at. So, I looked at everything. Part 8, Leonie. My best friend was named Leonie Aubert. She was 20 years old, 3 years older than me, a student at the university who had initially come into my life through a volunteer program she ran that occasionally brought university students to the lycée for mentoring sessions. She had been assigned to me not because anyone knew we would become friends, but because the assignment was administrative and the assignment had happened to produce something real. She was small and extremely loud in a way that had always seemed at odds with her physical size, and she had opinions about everything and expressed them with a directness that I had found initially overwhelming and then gradually one of the most refreshing things about my life. She did not soften things. She did not manage my experience. She looked at what was happening and said what she saw and trusted me to handle the seeing. When she found out I was ill, she came to the hospital on the first day and stood in the doorway of the room and looked at me and said, "This is unacceptable. I am going to be here every day." She was there every day. She brought food from the places I liked, and she read to me when I was too tired to read myself, and she argued with the nurses about the heating in the room, and once with a doctor about the specific wording of a recommendation, in a way that I could not fully follow, but that produced a result that appeared to be in my favor. She also shaved her head when I lost my hair to the chemotherapy. Not asked, not announced. She arrived one morning with her head shaved to a ½ centimeter of dark stubble and stood in the doorway with the specific expression of someone who has done something and is waiting to see if it was correct. I looked at her. She said, "It will grow back for both of us." I tried to laugh. The trying hurt. She came in and sat beside me. She said, "Leah, I need to tell you something." I said through the quality of voice that the treatment had left me with, which was diminished and painful to produce. "What?" She said, "Remy Fontaine has been asking about you." I looked at her. She said, "Not me specifically. He asked Jean-Luc. Jean-Luc told me." I said, "What did he ask?" She said, "How you were, whether you were going to be all right." He asked twice. I sat with this. She said, "I do not know what to do with that information. I am giving it to you because I thought you should have it." I said, "Thank you." She said, "Do you know what to do with it?" I said, "Not yet." She said, "That is all right. Things that have been a certain way for 12 years do not have to be resolved in a hospital room." I said, "No, they do not." She reached over and took my hand. Outside the window of the hospital room, it was snowing. The first snow of December, the early kind, that does not commit to staying, that falls and then reconsiders. I watched it through the window and I thought about Remy Fontaine asking Jean-Luc how I was, and I did not know what to do with it, and I held it carefully. The way you hold things you do not know what to do with, but know are not nothing. Part 9. Elise. In the second month of my treatment, Elise Moreau came to the hospital. I had been told she was coming before she arrived, which gave me time to decide how I felt about it. And what I decided was that I did not feel much. The specific quantity of feeling I had for Elise Moreau had been the specific quantity available to someone managing a survival situation, which is to say limited and functional. She had been a mechanism in the system of my life rather than a person, which is its own form of doing someone a disservice, but which was the form available to me. She came into the room with the expression of someone who has been required to do something difficult and is determined to complete it correctly. She sat in the chair beside the bed, and she looked at me, and for a moment she was simply a 19-year-old girl whose father was in trouble and whose cleverness had been used for years to harm someone who had not deserved it. She said, "I want to tell you that I know what happened on the bridge." I typed on the phone I now used for communication because my voice had become unreliable. "I know that, you know." She said, "I told my father it was an accident." I looked at her. She said, "He has already submitted the report. The report says I fell. It does not name you." I typed, "Why?" She said, "Because Remy told me what he had told you. And because I am not willing to let a person who is in a hospital fight a report I know is false." I typed, "You are also protecting yourself." She said, "Yes, both things are true." I thought about this. Both things are true is a statement about the coexistence of self-interest and the right action, which is most of the time what right action actually is. People do the right thing more often when doing it also serves them. This is not hypocrisy. It is the ordinary mechanism of the world. I typed your father. She said he has his own problems. Unrelated to this. Remy. She stopped. I looked at her. She said Remy gave me information about my father 2 months ago. Information he had gathered and held and chose to use at this specific moment. It was enough to get my father removed from his position. I typed as a favor to me. She said that was part of it, I think. Yes. I looked at the ceiling. She said I want to ask you something. I typed ask. She said I want to ask you to forgive me. Not because I expect you to, not because I have earned it. Because I am asking for myself as much as for you. Because carrying the thing I have done to you is something I have to put somewhere. I thought about this for a long time. Then I typed, I cannot tell you whether I forgive you yet. That is not the right question for a hospital room in December. What I can tell you is that I do not hate you, and that the things you did to me for 3 years came out of a logic that the world gave you, and that you chose not to examine, and the not examining is yours to answer for, and it seems that you are beginning to answer for it. That is what I have. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, thank you. She stood up. At the door, she paused. She said, I hope you get better. I typed, I know. She left. I lay in the hospital bed and looked out the window at the December sky, and I thought about the specific complexity of a world in which the person who has wronged you is also a person, which it always is, and which never stops being difficult. Part 10. The message at 3. 3 in the morning on a Tuesday in January. I was awake because the treatment made sleep unreliable, a shifting and shallow thing that moved in and out of usefulness. And I was sitting against the pillows in the hospital room with the specific quality of 3 in the morning awareness that strips everything back to what is actually true. My phone lit up. The message was from a number I had not saved but recognized. It said, Leah, I do not hate you anymore. I wanted you to know. I read it 3 times. I did not respond immediately. I held the phone and I looked at the message, and I thought about everything it contained. The 12 years, the pencil cases and the physics prize and the bridge. The 7-year-old boy in the dark before a door. The debt that I had been carrying for 12 years because he had placed it on me, and the world had agreed that it was correctly placed. I do not hate you anymore. Not I am sorry. Not I was wrong. Not even forgive me. Just the statement of a fact offered at 3 in the morning to a person in a hospital room. The specific economy of someone who has been carrying something for 12 years and has found in whatever process had brought him to this message a way to set it down. I thought about what my grandmother had said. You are a good girl, Leah, whatever anyone says. I thought about Jean-Luc saying the smaller version is not the accurate version. I thought about Leonie with her shaved head in the doorway. I typed, you never should have. I put the phone down. I looked at the ceiling of the hospital room. The December sky outside the window had cleared and there were stars, which is unusual in Paris, but which happens sometimes in January when the air is cold enough and clean enough. I looked at the stars. Remy Fontaine did not hate me anymore. He had said so at 3 in the morning, and the saying of it had taken 12 years to arrive, and I did not know what I felt about it. I knew that I was not angry. I knew that I was not relieved in any simple sense. I felt something that was closer to the specific tiredness of a very long thing ending. The way you feel when you have been carrying something heavy and have been allowed to set it down. The exhaustion and the lightness arriving simultaneously. I looked at the stars for a long time. Then I closed my eyes. Part 11, the Polonia trees. The end of my treatment came in the spring, not the end of the illness. The doctors are careful with that word. They speak of remission and monitoring and the ongoing relationship between a body and a thing that has been in it. But the active treatment ended. The daily hospital, the chemicals and the machines, and what remained was me, in a world that looked in April, like it had always looked, but which I was seeing through a different quality of attention. I had lost my voice, and then partially regained it, the specific partial recovery that is not the same as before, but is more than nothing, a voice that has a quality of roughness, now a permanent quality, the specific roughness of someone who has been through something that left a mark on the instrument. Leonie took me on the first good day of April to the Jardin des Plantes, which has a row of paulownia trees that flower in spring with a specific purple that I had wanted to see for years without having gone. We walked slowly. I was not capable of fast. She matched my pace without comment, the way she matched everything, without comment, with the specific grace of someone who has decided that the other person's pace is the right pace. The paulownia trees were in flower, the specific purple of them heavy and dense and a little improbable against the Paris April sky, was everything I had imagined, and also completely different from what I had imagined the way things are when you finally see them after anticipating them for years. We sat on a bench, and I looked at the trees, and Leonie bought 2 cups of coffee from a cart nearby and handed me mine, and we sat in the way we had learned to sit during the hospital months comfortably, without needing to fill the space. After a while, she said, "Leah." I said, "Yes." She said, "He came." I said, "Who?" She said, "Remy. He asked if he could come, and I said that was not my decision, and he asked me to ask you." I looked at the paulownia trees. I said, "When?" She said, "Now. He is at the entrance." I sat with this. She said, "I will tell him no if you want." I said, "No." She said, "No, you want me to tell him no, or no, as in..." I said, "Let him come." She stood up and walked toward the entrance. I stayed on the bench with the coffee and the paulownia trees and the April light. He came across the garden, the way he moved, with the economy of someone who does not waste motion. He was taller than I remembered, or I was smaller, which was probable, given the winter. He stood in front of the bench, and he looked at me, with the eyes I had been looking at for 12 years, and in them was something I had not seen before in 12 years of looking. He sat down on the bench beside me, not close, not performed distance, the natural distance of 2 people who do not yet know the right distance. He said nothing for a long time. I said nothing. The paulownia trees, the April light. Then he said, "I owe you something." I said, "You do not have to." He said, "I do. Not for you, for me. I cannot carry what I have done without saying it." I said, "Then say it." He said, "I am sorry. For all of it. For 12 years of it. I knew what I was doing, and I told myself it was justified, and the justification was not wrong in its premise, and it was completely wrong in its conclusion. Your father did what he did. You did not. You have never been responsible for what he did, and I made you carry it anyway. And I am sorry." The April light moved through the paulownia flowers. I said, "I know why you did it." He said, "That does not excuse it." I said, "No, it does not. But I can understand a 7-year-old boy in the dark, before a door, deciding that the only thing available to him was to make someone answer for it. I cannot excuse what the 17-year-old made of that decision, but I can understand where it came from." He was quiet. I said, "Remy." He said, "Yes." I said, "What you gave me when you told Elise what you had seen on the bridge and what you did with her father's position and the message at 3 a.m, these things are not enough to settle the account. But they are real, and I received them as real." He said, "I know they are not enough." I said, "I am not asking you to settle the account. I am telling you that I received what you offered." He looked at the paulownia trees. He said, "What do we do now?" I said, "I do not know. But I think we start with not pretending the last 12 years did not happen, and not allowing the last 12 years to be the only thing that exists." He said, "Is that possible?" I said, "I am choosing to believe it is." He looked at me with the eyes I had been looking at for 12 years, and in them was something that might, given time and the right conditions, become something else, not what it had been. Something built from what had been destroyed, and from the specific materials of 2 people who understood each other at a level that had nothing to do with affection, and everything to do with the specific knowledge that comes from 12 years of being the only witness to each other's truth. We sat in the Jardin des Plantes in the April light. The paulownia trees, Leonie somewhere behind us having the specific tact to be where she was and not where we were. The roughness in my voice, the things I had lost and the things I had kept. This is not a story that resolves. I want to be honest about this. There are no clean endings available to people who have been where we had been. There is only the continuing and the question of how you continue and the choice that the continuing requires you to make. I had been making that choice for 12 years in the reduced version, in the specific minimum that survival allowed. I was going to keep making it in a larger version, in the one that Jean-Luc had named and that I had not been able to rebuild on my own, and that was now in April beginning to assemble itself from the materials that remained. Epilogue, the voice. This is what I want to tell you last. My voice is not what it was. The roughness in it is permanent, the specific roughness of something that has been through the treatment and emerged changed. When I speak now, the quality of it is different from the quality it had before, not worse exactly, but unmistakably marked by what happened. People notice it, not always consciously, but there is something in it that registers the way the quality of anything that has survived damage registers not as weakness, but as a specific and irreducible honesty. This voice has been somewhere. This voice has a history. I teach now. I teach physics at a secondary school in the 14th arrondissement of Paris. And I have been teaching there for 3 years, and my students know me as the teacher with the particular voice, and they do not know what the voice contains, and that is correct. What they do know is that I see them, not the performance of seeing, not the bureaucratic acknowledgement of presence, the actual registering of each person as a person. I know the ones who sit at the back. I know the ones who are trying to become invisible. I know what it looks like when a student has reduced themselves to the minimum available footprint, and I know that inside the minimum there is always more. I call on them, not to expose them, to tell them in the specific way that a question directed at a person tells them that I see the version that is not in the room yet, and I am waiting for it. Sometimes they tell me afterward, the ones who have been sitting at the back, that it was the first time a teacher looked at them directly. I accept this without comment because what happened when Jean-Luc looked at me in my final year is not something I can describe to them, and it does not need to be described. It needs only to be continued. Remy Fontaine teaches engineering at a university in Lyon. We are in contact. Not frequently, not with the easy familiarity of people who have always been friends. With the specific careful quality of two people who have a complicated history and have chosen to be honest about the complication, rather than pretending it is resolved. He sends me messages sometimes. I send them back sometimes. He has not become the person he would have been if the night of the 14th of November had not happened. No one becomes that person. What happened to him was real, and it formed him in ways that cannot be unformed. But he is no longer only that. He is the person who is continuing after what happened, which is the only kind of person available to any of us. Léonie is in Marseille. She is a social worker, which surprises no one who knows her, and she visits me in Paris occasionally, and we eat at the places I like, and she has opinions about everything and expresses them. She grew her hair back. So did I. Jean-Luc is still teaching. He moved from Lamarck after my year to a school in the 19th arrondissement, where he has been for 5 years. He is 30 years old now, and he has the quality of someone who has been teaching long enough to understand that it is not a performance, but a continued act of attention, daily renewed every morning, in front of a different set of faces that are waiting to be seen. My mother plants flowers in the window boxes of the apartment. She has been doing this for 3 years. Small things, petunias and lavender, and in the summer, a particular trailing thing with yellow flowers whose name I do not know. She tends them with the focused care of someone who has found in the maintaining of small living things the specific form of attention that her nature requires. She is not small anymore, or she is not only small, she is the size of herself, which has turned out to be larger than either of us knew during the years when she was disappearing. I have a voice that has been through something. I have a back row and a question I know how to ask. I have Leonie and Jean-Luc and my mother and her window boxes and the Polonia trees in April in the Jardin des Plantes. I have a life that is the size it should be. That is enough. That is, I find everything. End. A Lifetime of Hating You is an original, dramatic narrative set in Paris, France. All characters, events, and institutions depicted herein are entirely fictional. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or to actual organizations or events is entirely coincidental. Additional chapter: The Grandmother. My grandmother's name was Marguerite, and she was the most constant thing in my life, from the time I was 5 until she died when I was 18. She was my mother's mother, born in 1942, in the Corrèze region, a small woman who had lived through things that she did not discuss, but that had formed in her the specific quality of a person who understands what endurance requires and does not ask others to perform more than it. She smelled of lavender and the particular powder she put on her face and old paper, because she kept books everywhere in her apartment, not the organized books of someone who displays reading as a credential, but the practical accumulation of a person who reads constantly for the specific reason that reading is necessary. She came to get me on the night my father died. I do not remember this clearly, which is how it is with things that happen to 5-year-olds. I remember pieces: her coat, the way she held my hand, the smell of her apartment when we arrived, the lavender and paper, and the specific warmth of a small space heated carefully. She did not explain what had happened that night. She gave me warm milk and put me in the bed in the small room that had always been available to me when I visited, and she sat beside the bed until I was asleep. In the morning she made breakfast and we ate together, and she talked about the birds outside the window and whether it was going to rain. She protected me from the truth for 3 months, not with lies, with the selective offering of information, the specific parenting strategy of a woman who understood that some truths are better received at a pace the recipient can manage. By the time I understood the full picture, I had 3 months of her apartment and her lavender and her books inside me, and I was slightly less 5 years old. And the picture, when it came, went into a person who had been slightly fortified. She said to me the day I understood, "Your father made a terrible mistake. He was frightened, and he ran from it twice." That says something about who he was in that specific moment. It does not say everything about who he was. You are not the mistake he made. You are something else entirely. I said, "What am I?" She said, "You are the thing that continues. That is who you are." I held this. I was 6 years old, and I held it the way a 6-year-old holds an abstraction, with the specific determination of someone who does not entirely understand it, but has decided to keep it until they do. She was the person I called when things were very bad. Not every time, because she was old and I did not want to give her more than she could carry. But in the worst years, the years when the weight was maximum, I called her, and she answered in the way she always answered, completely, without the management of her own discomfort that most adults brought to these conversations. She said once, "The world has decided you owe a debt that is not yours. The world is wrong, but the world is also the world, and it will not change its mind quickly. What you have to do is survive it long enough for it to change." I said, "How long?" She said, "As long as it takes." And then a little longer, for good measure. She died in the spring of my final year, 2 months before my diagnosis. Not dramatically. She was 82, and she had been ill in the slow way of very old people, and the illness concluded on a Tuesday morning in March, while I was in school. My mother called me out of Jean-Luc's class to tell me. I went to the corridor, and I held the phone, and I thought about the lavender and the books and the warm milk on the night of the 5th of November, and the thing that continues. I did not cry at school. I went back to Jean-Luc's class, and I sat down and I opened my notebook. After class, he stopped me at the door. He said, "Moreau." I said, "Yes." He said, "Are you all right?" I looked at him. I said, "My grandmother died this morning." He said, "I am very sorry." I said, "She was 82, and she had a long, good life, and she was the most constant thing I have had, and I am going to be very not all right for a while. But I am going to be all right eventually." He said, "Yes, you are." I went home to my mother. When I was diagnosed 2 months later, one of the things I thought about was that my grandmother had not had to see it. This was not entirely a comfort, and it was not entirely not a comfort. It was simply a fact about the timing, the specific arrangement of events that means some people are spared some things. Which is not fairness, because fairness is not the system that governs these arrangements, but which sometimes, in specific instances, works out in a way that resembles mercy. She had told me, "You are the thing that continues." I continued. She was right. Additional chapter, what I lost and kept. I want to make an accounting, because this story has been long, and the accounting is part of the honesty. I lost my voice in the original form. The roughness is permanent. Some ranges are gone and will not return. I cannot sing, which is not something I had done before the illness, but which I find I miss as a theoretical capacity, the way you miss things you are not using, but that you understand now you would have wanted, eventually. I lost time. 12 years of a childhood and adolescence organized around survival rather than exploration. I cannot recover this. I can only acknowledge that this is what the time was, and that the person who came out of it is formed by the survival, which means the survival produced something even as it cost something. I lost my father at 5 and did not grieve him properly until I was 24. The grief came late, and in pieces, the specific grief for a person who is both the author of a catastrophe and a parent you knew before the catastrophe, and the two griefs are not the same grief, and they do not resolve each other. I kept my grandmother's words, the things that continue, the thing that the world cannot take from you if you do not let it, which is the specific version of yourself that is not the reduced version, the one that Jean-Luc named, and that I am now in the process of inhabiting more fully. I kept Leonie. This is one of the more significant keepings. She is the kind of person who does not diminish and is not diminished, who adds to every space she enters. And having her in my life is the specific dividend of a difficult period that I would not have predicted. I kept the physics. This sounds small. It is not small. The specific love of systems with internal logic, of problems that have true answers, of the elegance of a correctly derived result, has been with me since I was old enough to pick up a textbook, and it has never left. In the worst years, it was the clearest thing, the one part of my existence that behaved according to rules and produced outcomes that corresponded to the quality of the effort I put in. I teach it now, and I teach it with the specific enthusiasm of someone who loves the thing for its own sake and wants their students to understand why it is worth loving. I kept in some form that I am still understanding Remy Fontaine. This is the most complicated of the keepings. He is in my life in the way of something that was harmful for a long time and then became something else slowly through the specific work of two people who chose to be honest about the history rather than pretend it was not there. We are not friends in the easy sense. We are something that requires a word that does not exist yet. Two people who were the primary facts of each other's childhood in the worst possible way and who have chosen to continue in the only way available to them, which is with full knowledge of everything and the specific courage of people who have decided that the knowledge is not a reason to stop. He called me once in the winter after the Polonia trees, and we talked for 2 hours, not about the 12 years, about his work, his students, the specific problems of engineering education at the university level, about my teaching, about Paris in winter, which neither of us particularly loves, about a book we had both read without knowing the other had read it. The conversation was taken simply two people who know each other talking. The history was present in the texture of it, the specific awareness that each of us carried of what the other had been to us. But it was not the subject. It was the ground. After the call, I sat in my apartment and I thought about a 7-year-old boy in the dark before a door and a girl with a pencil case full of insects, and 12 years of the wait between them and two people sitting in a garden in April, in the light of the Paulonia flowers, making a choice that is not forgiveness exactly, and is not amnesia, and is something in between that does not have a name. The thing that continues. Yes. Additional chapter, the letter I wrote. I wrote a letter to my father, not to send. He had been dead for 19 years, and the address was not available. I wrote it because there are things I needed to say, and the only available recipient was the page. I wrote, I do not hate you. I want you to know this because I have spent years understanding whether it was true, and it is. I do not hate you, and I did not hate you even in the worst years, which is something I had to examine carefully, because not hating the person who caused the worst years requires a form of reasoning that takes time to complete. I wrote, I understand that the night of the 14th of November was the culmination of things that had already been in motion. The drinking, the argument, the fear, the specific sequence of a frightened man in a car on a wet road who made 2 catastrophic choices and then a third that removed him from the account. I understand all of this. Understanding it is not excusing it. It is simply understanding it, which is what I am capable of. I wrote, you left me to carry the debt. This is the thing I am least able to reconcile. Not the accident which was terrible but which was not intended. The leaving. The specific choice to remove yourself from a situation that you had created and to leave your daughter and your wife to be defined by your creation for the rest of their lives. This is the thing that cost the most. Cost. I am telling you this not to condemn you. I think you condemned yourself sufficiently on the night in question. I am telling you because it needed to be said, and saying it to the page is the only saying available. I wrote, I am teaching physics. I am teaching it in a room with back row students who are trying to become invisible, and I call on them, and I mean it when I ask them to develop their answer. I am teaching it because it is true, and the truth of it is not negotiable, and the rules apply to everyone, and the answers follow from the work. I am teaching it because you cannot hurt me anymore, and Remy Fontaine is teaching in Lyon, and my mother plants flowers in the window boxes, and my grandmother was right about the thing that continues. I wrote, I hope wherever you are that you have found a form of understanding. Not of yourself you had that the night you opened the window, understanding of me, of the person who was the thing that continued. I hope you can see the roughness in my voice and know what it means. And I hope you can see the Paulonia trees in April, and the back row, and Leonie with her shaved head, and the specific form of life I have made from what you left me. I wrote, I am all right. That is the thing I want you to know. Whatever it cost, and however it came, I am all right. I folded the letter. I put it in the drawer of the desk in my apartment next to the copy of the physics prize certificate that the school eventually issued, a corrected version of 6 months after my graduation, quietly and without ceremony, which I accepted with the same quiet. The letter is there. I take it out sometimes. I do not read it. I hold it for a moment, and then I put it back. The thing that continues. Yes. Additional chapter, the first day back. 3 weeks after the Paulonia trees, I went back to the school where I teach for the first time since the illness. The headmistress had been patient. She had held my position through the winter and the spring and the beginning of the summer term, which was a form of generosity that I had accepted with the specific difficulty of someone who is not accustomed to generosity and does not entirely know how to receive it, without finding the reason it must be conditional. I arrived early. Because I always arrive early, because arriving early is a form of preparation. And preparation is the thing I know how to do. I went to my classroom and I opened the windows and I set up the materials for the day, and I sat at the desk for 10 minutes in the specific quiet of a room that is about to be filled. The students arrived. Some had been mine the previous year. A few of them, the ones who had been in the final year and were now at the beginning of the year, I would not have taught them. But most were new to me. A new class. A fresh set of faces, with the specific quality of September, the start of year quality that is both guarded and tentative. The quality of people who have not yet understood what kind of room this is. I looked at them, all of them systematically, the way I look at new classes, noting the ones at the front who will be the easy ones, the ones who perform engagement as a strategy, noting the ones in the middle who are waiting to see, noting the ones at the back. There were 3 at the back. In the specific corner of the back, the positions chosen with the deliberateness of people who have had practice choosing them. 3 students sitting with the specific quality of people who expect to be ignored and have prepared themselves accordingly. I said, "Good morning. My name is Madame Moreau. I teach physics, which means I teach you the rules of how the world works. The rules apply to everyone in this room equally. Let us start with that." I looked at the 3 at the back. I said, "I will call on everyone, not to test you, to hear what you think. The quality of what you think is the only thing that matters in this room." One of the 3 at the back looked up. She was 16, with the specific expression of someone who has heard this kind of opening statement before and has learned that it is usually performative. I held her gaze. I said, "I mean that." She looked at me for a moment. Then she looked back at her desk. But her shoulders had changed. A small thing, the specific small thing of a person who has decided provisionally to consider the possibility. I turned to the board. The day began. This is what I do, every day. With the roughness in my voice and the back row and the specific form of attention that my grandmother gave me, and Jean-Luc named, and the illness clarified, and the Paulonia trees confirmed. The thing that continues. Every morning, new faces. Every morning, the question asked in the correct way. Every morning, develop that. That is the life. That is the whole of it. That is enough.